Amen. Shabbat shalom. How many of you excited? You should be excited to be here today. If you're not, then you're in the wrong place. Amen. How many realize that it's amazing to me because you can praise and worship him in any language, and it's powerful, and it will move him, and he will hear that. But when you begin to worship him, I believe in the Hebrew tongue, how many realize that was the language that was created to reveal who he is? It was the language created to reveal his character and his identity to his people. And so when he hears his people speaking in his language, telling him what his word says about them, you can feel there's a change, there's a difference. You can feel it. It becomes tangible. Amen. And as we were singing that song, my goodness, the one phrase that stuck out to me was atakan. You are here. You don't have to say anything else, just you are here. And that sums up the entire redemptive plan of Yahweh from the very beginning all the way to the end. When we see being restored to him, you are here. I was reminded of in Genesis chapter 1, even when you're in a waste and desolate condition, even in a fallen state, you are here. We find in Genesis chapter 1 that the Ruach is hovering over that which was made waste and desolate. Tohu vabohu, and yet the Spirit hovers over it, touching yet not touching. Waiting for the moment to release the word, to release the breath that will bring life back. How many realize that we're told in Ezekiel 37, we're the bones. We're a valley of dry bones and we've been gathered. It's a waste and desolate situation and place. And yet the Ruach is right now. We're in the season where he's hovering over. He's hovering over the bones and he's waiting because there's a set moment. There's a divine appointment when the breath, the Ruach, the power and his presence is going to be released and bring life into these bones. And that is so powerful. I don't know if you can picture that or understand it, but as I was looking at this week's Torah portion, I know I'm going to get ahead, but it's amazing to me because I've never looked at it this way before. There was 2 arcs in the wilderness, the entire wilderness journey. One was full of his presence, and one was full of dead bones. They were carried together, walking in step, hovering, waiting for the moment when they would become one, and those bones would live again. And we find that when we fast forward to our day, this is the day, this is the time that the prophecy is going to be fulfilled. The bones will live again. Ki ata, you are here. Amen. As we look at this week's Torah portion, it is Shemini, as Pastor John was alluding to, and it's translated as 8th. And if you read it from the English, we understand it's the official start of the tabernacle service. And when we look at it, because we're so far removed from that, we don't understand what it means for that tabernacle to have his tangible, viable presence. Because it's become so watered down for us today. We know, well, oh, he loves me just the way I am, and we think that we can come into his presence anyway. We've completely lost the concept of holiness, of what it means to be able to really enter into his presence and to feel the weight of his glory. And yet we find he's preparing his people because that's what you're about to be reunited with. So you have to understand what it means. You have to understand what he's revealing here. And as we look at this, it's taken from Leviticus chapter 9, verse 1 through chapter 11, verse 47. And as you look at what's taking place from the end of Exodus to these first chapters of Leviticus, the tabernacle has been set up and been in the process of being dedicated for 7 days. That's why this Torah portion is called 8th. It's the 8th day. It's the day of new beginnings. The 8th day, it's now turned over to Aaron, and it will now begin to function as this place that will house the presence. And we find that it's on this 8th day that when the sacrifices are given, a fire comes out from the holy place, and it lights the altar. And as we read this, if you're not careful, you'll completely miss what's taking place because, as we said, we become so far removed from it. And yet here we find the children of Israel, they've been brought out of Egypt. They've seen the miraculous. They've seen the hand of Yahweh deliver them from the most powerful nation on earth. And now we find they're almost at a year to the date from being delivered. And in that year, they have been rebellious. In that year, they have rejected their Redeemer. In that year, they have built a golden calf instead of becoming the dwelling place for his presence. So now as they continue on and they build this tabernacle, and it's been built and it's been set up for 7 days, You have to really put yourself in their shoes, because how do they know that he's going to answer their cry? How do they know? Because they've been rebellious, they've rejected him, he had every right to cut them off. How do they know that his presence will actually dwell among them? And so when we put ourselves in their shoes, oh my goodness, here we're here today as well. As a people, we've been cut off, we've been separated, and yet we're all looking and anticipating that when we cry out, that presence will appear. He will be in our midst. And so we find that for 7 days, the tabernacle has been completed, it's been furnished, it's been prepared, and all this has been handled solely by Moshe, the only one that was given the right to be able to go on the mountain, to experience his presence. Moshe is the one that does all of this. But now on the 8th day, we find now it's about to be turned over to the people. And we find that in Exodus chapter 40, it provides some details of the exact date. It's the first day of the first month of the second year. It's the anniversary of Israel's deliverance from Egypt. And as we look at this, remember that we've said countless times before that Israel was supposed to be the dwelling place. They were supposed to be a living tabernacle. That was the intent of Yahweh bringing them and delivering them out of Egypt, that he was going to dwell in the people at that moment. But we find that this is rejected, and so now a physical tent must be built to house the presence. And yet, even though, as we said, we know Yahweh doesn't have a plan B, but the pattern is being set that this was what he was intended. They rejected it. He already knew. So the physical tent will be built. Well, this physical tabernacle, it becomes a mirror. It reflects, it points towards, it reveals the condition of the people of Israel. As this tabernacle becomes the center of their world for the entire 40 years that they will travel in the wilderness, it's a mirror that they're looking into. We find that for 7 days, as this tabernacle has been built, prepared, and set up, there's a body prepared, because remember that the tabernacle, it's built in the form of a body, the form of a man laid out on the earth. So for 7 days, there's a body that's been prepared, but there's no life in it. We find that this becomes a picture. Remember, it's a mirror of the people, of the children of Israel. They are a body prepared, yet they have no life in them. It becomes a foreshadowing as well, because you have to understand it's a circle within a circle within a circle. Not only do you have what's taking place with the tabernacle, it becomes a mirror of the children of Israel standing there in that moment, but it also becomes a picture of Israel today, the scattered house of the tribes of Israel. Ezekiel 37, the dry bones, the scattered bones of the house today. And so we find that just as Israel is waiting with bated breath and the questions being asked regarding this tabernacle man that they've built, can this body live? We find the question is also resounding, can these bones live? Can this body live? Can the people that have been brought out, can they live? And we find that the tabernacle pattern is about to give them their answer. And so as we look at this, it seems that there's a connection between the filling of the tabernacle with his glory and his presence, and it directly is correlating and corresponding to the promise of the resurrection of these bones. We find this is further emphasized to the people because the ark that contained the bones of Joseph, you can find this in the book of Exodus. When they're leaving, they were charged with, do not leave the bones of Joseph in Egypt. Take my bones with you. Well, it's quite interesting because the bones of Joseph, it describes it as being in a coffin, but the Hebrew term is the exact same word to describe the Ark of the Covenant. Joseph's bones were in an ark. And we find that the ark that carried the bones of Joseph is carried, according to the sages, alongside the Ark of the Covenant on the entire wilderness journey. The bones of Joseph represent the whole house of Israel, and it's connected to the ark. The ark represents the presence and the glory, literally life. And we find that these two arks are carried together, moving in tandem throughout the entire wilderness journey. And yet, it's amazing to me because this is something you don't always think about, but the presence of Yahweh is life. The presence of Yahweh is so powerful and emanating, and yet you have these dry, dead bones being carried alongside it. You would think that those bones would have been resurrected. Because even, was it Elijah, they threw, a dead body was thrown in the grave, and that person resurrected with just the essence that was left in his bones. And so you begin to, my goodness, how is the ark that's carrying the dead bones of Joseph right alongside the Ark of the Covenant, how is it not affecting and just emanating and causing these bones to live? And yet we find they remain lifeless and dead this entire journey, but it's for a season. And it seems as if it becomes this teaching mechanism and this tool. It's a living blueprint before the children of Israel that are on this journey until they choose to become the ark of his presence. Those bones will remain lifeless. And yet we find that there's a promise that the bones will be resurrected. Ezekiel 37 verse 3 tells us, "And he said unto me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, O Adonai Yahweh, thou knowest." And so we find that here's this blueprint, this example, this pattern that they're walking it out. These bones remain lifeless until they're reunited and made one with the ark of his presence. And as they're carried, it's just like the Ruach, the Spirit, hovering over that which is tohu vabohu, waste and desolate. It's touching yet not touching, waiting to release life, waiting for the burst that will bring forth this new beginning. Now let's look here in Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 3, where he says, "Can these bones live?" The word live there in the Hebrew, it's conjugated as ha-tikiena. It has the same numerical value, 488, as the phrase, "as the voice of him that cried." Mikol ha-koreh. It's found in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 4, and it says, "And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, at the Mikol ha-koreh, and the house was filled with smoke." And if you're unfamiliar with Isaiah chapter 6, it's Isaiah's vision of the glory filling the temple. And he hears at the voice of him that cried, they're crying, "Holy, holy, holy, kadosh, kadosh, kadosh." And his presence fills the temple so much so that it begins to shake and to quake. And we find that in this vision, this is when Isaiah has the coal taken from the altar and it touches his lips to cleanse his lips so that he can declare, "Hineni, send me." The bones coming to life seem to be directly connected with the temple being filled with the glory at the sound of the voice. And so we find that this become they're connected, they're patterned, they're joined one to another. And we find that just as Yahweh breathed into Adam, causing him to live, we see this being played out. Isaiah has the coal touched to his lips. What does it do? It releases that breath into him as well so that he can speak. He can become that nefesh kaya, that speaking living soul. And so now as we look at this, we can begin to understand the significance of what's about to take place. For 7 days, the tabernacle has stood with no life. For 7 days, it's as if there's been a dead body in the midst of Israel. Yet if his glory chooses to reside here, it's acting as a covenant promise that when his glory fills this tabernacle, it's a covenant promise that the bones as well will be able to live again if they'll respond to the voice that cries forth. If the tabernacle body can live, then surely so can the bones of Israel. And so now you can understand why Israel, while they're waiting with bated breath, it's almost as if I believe there's a hush over the people because they know that by their own actions, they've been cut off. They have no right to be here, yet in his mercy, will this tabernacle live, giving them a promise and a covenant they can look forward to, that in the future, the bones will live. Now, this same voice, the Mikol HaKoreh, the voice that cries, is also seen crying in the wilderness. In Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, we read, "The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness. Prepare ye the way of Yahweh, make straight in the desert a highway for our Elohim." Shepherd John was already quoting it. The mountains will be brought low and the valleys will be raised up. Why? Because it's preparing a way. The voice is crying forth. Well, it's no accident that upon exiting the Red Sea, Israel enters the wilderness. Pay attention to the wilderness connection. Wilderness in Hebrew, it's the word midbar. It's literally can be translated and broken down as the mouth where the word is spoken forth. They've come to the place where the voice is crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way." We find that Israel's been brought to this wilderness, and as this voice cries forth, I believe it's calling to the bones to come to life and be filled. And yet we find the choice is Israel's. The choice is theirs, just like the choice was Adam's in the garden. We find that in Genesis chapter 3, the voice is walking in the garden, and the voice cries, it calls forth, yet Adam hides from the voice. Israel has a choice. The moment they cross that Red Sea and they step into the midbar, into the wilderness, the choice is there. The voice is calling and crying forth, but will they answer it or will they hide from it? We find that Israel, this generation, just like Adam, hides from the voice. And you can see this when they are specifically at Mount Sinai. The coal, the living voice is on the mountain. And what does Israel say? You go, Moses. You go talk to the voice. We'll stay here. We'll do whatever you say, but we're not going to go and present ourselves to the voice that's crying forth. And so we find that because of this, the bones remain lifeless for a season. And yet we understand there's a promise that they're given with the glory filling the tabernacle. It's dealing with the future resurrection. So even though just like Adam, they've hid from the voice, Adam was also given a promise that there's a future resurrection. Now, we have to understand that Yahweh thinks generationally. This is a covenant promise that's being confirmed with the generation that's gathered at the tabernacle, yet it's one they will not see in their own lives, in their own lifetime. Instead, this promise speaks of a future restoration and deliverance of the scattered bones, you and I, that would be gathered at the voice of him who cried to become the living tabernacle finally, and it will have come full circle. And we find that just as Abraham was given a covenant and promises that he would not see in his lifetime, yet he's entrusted with it. He's to guard it. He's to watch over it. He's to pass it down. But it's a promise that he will not see. It will be one that his descendants see. So here we find that Israel is allowed to be a piece in the bigger redemption plan. It's laying the groundwork for the resurrection and the regathering of their house. The gathering of the bones today is the fulfillment of the covenant promise that's made here when this tabernacle comes to life. And it's quite interesting because when you look from a Hebrew perspective and mindset, it's when you have generations and your name is still present among the people, it's as if you're not cut off. But if your name's cut off, if you have no lineage, if you have no descendants, if you have no way to prove or declare your lineage, then you're cut off. And I believe that this is what Israel has being revealed to them. It's a promise of resurrection. You won't be cut off in the sense that you're going to still have a lineage. You're going to have a name that will be present, and that name is going to be regathered and brought back. Amen? Now let's take a look at this in Leviticus chapter 9, verse 1. It says, "And it came to pass on the 8th day that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel." And we find that as you read the rest of chapter 9, Moshe is leading Aaron through the sacrifices that must be offered in order to dedicate the tabernacle. But we're going to focus on this word for 8th. It's the 8th day. In Hebrew, 8th is Strong's number 8066, Shemini, and it's translated as meaning 8th from the root word Shemone, Strong's number 8083, 8. And yet Shemone in the Hebrew is quite interesting because it has the same letters that form the word neshama, spirit, breath. The neshama is what is breathed into Adam for him to become a living soul. The neshama is often connected throughout the scriptures with the mind or the intellect. It's what separates you from the rest of all creation. You have the neshama. The neshama is within you. And it seems to infer that on this day, the 8th day, that there's about to be an opportunity for this body. Remember, we're talking about this tabernacle, this body that has no life in it, to be breathed into just as Adam was and receive the neshama. The mind and the intellect of the Most High is about to be deposited within this tabernacle that has been built and prepared for it. And yet we find that the promise that's being told to Israel is that if this body, if this tabernacle structure can live, if it can be given life, then it's a promise and a reflection that these dry bones as well can once again live, and not only live, but have restored to us the mind of the Creator. Amen? And so now you can understand, as they're waiting to see what his answer will be, as they're waiting to see if the Father is going to respond to the offering that they've brought, they understand that if this tabernacle doesn't live, if he chooses not to dwell here, then it's as if they're cut off. There's no hope. And so now you can begin to understand what the significance of this 8th day is. As we continue to look at this, the numerical value of Shemini, the title of this Torah portion, it equals 410. And it's quite interesting because 410 is the same value as the name Ararat. It's the name of the mountain where the Ark of Noah rested after the flood. And you'll find that Ararat is translated as meaning the curse reversed. And if you look, you'll find that the ark rests on the 17th of Aviv. Well, it's quite interesting because this is the first month. It's the month of Aviv in this Torah portion. So the month of Aviv is the same month that the tabernacle dedication is taking place. But the 17th of Aviv, when the ark rested, is the exact same day that Israel crossed the Red Sea, being brought out of bondage and out of Egypt. And so as we continue to make these connections, we have to ask the questions, do you think perhaps that upon being delivered out of Egypt, this was the set time for the bones, for the body to be presented and to have breath enter into them, literally to experience a resurrection, the curse of death reversed? It's no accident this is also the exact day that the Messiah was resurrected on Yom HaBikurim, fulfilling the pattern. It's the day of resurrection. So when Israel exits the Red Sea, it's the patterns being fulfilled. This is when they should have been filled. This is when they should have become living again and experienced a resurrection. And yet here we find at the end of Exodus and the beginning of Leviticus, it makes it very clear this is 1 year later. 1 year later, and yet this body is still lifeless. This body still is not housing the presence. And we find that just as the bones of Joseph remain lifeless for the entire journey, so does this generation of Israel. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, what prevents this generation from experiencing the resurrection that they were promised when they were delivered out of Egypt? Something kept them from being united. Something kept them from truly walking in what Yahweh had called them to do. They should have become a powerhouse in the earth, going into the land, taking back the inheritance, fulfilling the promise that Abraham was given, that your descendants will possess this and walk this out. And yet we find that the moment that they should begin walking in this, we still find that this generation is lifeless. They're compared to dry bones. And we understand this is exactly what we're hopefully anticipating ourselves. We all agree and quote Ezekiel. This is the days of Ezekiel 37. These are the bones. They're being gathered. They're coming together. The outcasts of Israel. Dry bone is coming to dry bone. And we understand that life is beginning to enter into this body of Messiah on the earth, all in preparation and anticipation of that breath, once again entering into these bones and us living again. Amen? And yet we find we can't ignore the warning that's presented here because there's a generation that missed it. That generation should have fulfilled way before Ezekiel was ever even written. They should have fulfilled Ezekiel 37. So we have to continue to look at this. It's interesting because Shemini is also the root of the term Sheminith. And it's a musical term denoting a specific octave or instrument. It's seen in Psalms chapter 6 and Psalms 12. And when you go and you read both of these Psalms, you'll find that both deal with the cry for help and deliverance, both from a state of death as well as from one's enemies. And it's quite interesting because Israel now, their greater worry is the fact that they are dead bones. The enemy right now is not even the issue. It's the fact that they themselves are likened unto a dead body. And Psalms chapter 6 specifically deals with that, being delivered from this state of death. But there's an interesting connection that can be seen in Psalms chapter 6, verse 4. This psalm is a Sheminith. That's what it's described. That's the title of this psalm. It's a specific musical term describing how this psalm was to be sung. Psalms chapter 6, verse 4 says, "Return, O Yahweh, Deliver my soul. Oh, save me for thy mercy's sake. But it's quite interesting because the phrase, return, O Yahweh. In the Hebrew, return, O Yahweh is shuvah Yahweh. And it echoes the proclamation that was declared every single time the Ark of the Covenant would rest after having traveled ahead of the children of Israel. When the Ark would rest and stop. Numbers chapter 10, verse 36, they would declare, return, O Yahweh, unto the many thousands of Israel. Shuvah Yahweh to Israel. That should be the cry of these bones. And it's quite interesting because when you look at this, the phrase Shuvah Yahweh is only seen specifically, that statement, not conjugated, not in a different order, not with other words, but just Shuvah Yahweh, return, O Yahweh, is only seen in 3 verses. Numbers chapter 10, Psalms chapter 6, and Psalms chapter 90, verse 13. And so when we see this connection here, we have to ask, could this be what's taking place in Shemini? Is it beginning to reveal and unlock some things that are hidden within the Hebrew language that Shemini, it's literally becoming a prophetical declaration, not only that this generation is experiencing, but where we are today. It's not just revealing the time that, it's the 8th day, Shemini, the 8th day. Finally, they're going to get this going for 7 days. Moses had to teach them. They finally get it after 7 days. But no, Shemini, the 8th day, deals with the timing of a specific cry. A specific note that's being released from the hearts of the people, and it's the cry of Shuvah Yahweh. Return, O Yahweh, to the many thousands of Israel. Shuvah, may the neshama, may your breath enter these bones again. That's the cry that's being released as this tabernacle's prepared. And yet it's astounding to me because every time they would declare this, every single time they would cry, Shuvah Yahweh, return to the many thousands of Israel, the presence returns to the Ark of the Covenant and not to the bones. The presence returns to the Ark of the Covenant, and it does not rest on the Ark right there next to it that's holding the bones of Joseph. They're moving in step, walking in tandem. Stepping in step, but they're not yet ready to live again. Because those bones will only live when the people are ready to become the ark of the presence. And so we find that this is a cry that's issued and declared forth every single time throughout the wilderness journey, and yet every time the answer was, not yet. You're not ready. Not yet. He'll be in their midst, hovering, touching but not touching, right there, walking step and step with them, and yet not quite united just yet. Let's look at the word return. It says, Shuvah, return, O Yahweh. Strong's number 7725, Shuv, and it means to return, to restore. Specifically, to return to a place where you've already been, to return to your natural or intended state. In other words, every time they would release this cry, it was crying out for the neshama, the presence, to return to the intended habitation, to the natural and intended state that was first created for it to dwell in, which was not that tabernacle, physical construction, but Adam. And yet our answer is given in Zechariah chapter 1, verse 3. It says, thus saith Yahweh Sabaoth, turn, shuv you unto me, says Yahweh Sabaoth, and I will turn or shuv unto you. And so we find that it's as if there's a line that's been drawn in the sand that every time Israel declares this, it's reminding them when he doesn't actually fill the bones, that when you turn to me, then I will turn to you. So we have to ask, how do we return? How do we make teshuvah? In order to be restored to our intended state, in order for Yahweh to respond by returning to the many thousands of Israel, causing life to enter these bones. Well, the numerical value of the phrase Shuvah Yahweh equals 339. And it's quite interesting because the 339th word in the Hebrew script is found in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. It says, so Elohim created man in his own image. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam. Et, Aleph Tav, is the 339th word of the scriptures. The Aleph Tav, who we find that Messiah himself declares, in the Greek we read it as, I'm the Alpha and Omega, I'm the beginning and the end, yet the Hebrew is, I'm the Aleph Tav. And the Aleph Tav is seen throughout the entire scriptures, all the way from the very beginning, and he was making a proclamation, that's me, I'm the Et, I'm the Aleph Tav, from the beginning to the end. Amen? And we find that in this phrase, Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam, Et, the Aleph Tav Messiah, is connecting Elohim and Ha'adam, the man. And we find that because Adam and Israel refused to hear the voice, these bones would not live again until the Et, the Aleph Tav, the Messiah, comes and connects man back. And so we find that every time they would declare, every time they would release this cry, Shuvah Yahweh, it's literally a cry, whether today they want to acknowledge it or not. It was a cry for the Mashiach. It was a cry for the Aleph Tav, the only one that could restore and once again connect man back to Elohim. Amen. We find that Shemini, the cry of return and restoration, is a cry for the Aleph Tav, the Messiah, to become the divine connection between Yahweh and man. And when this happens, it would enable man to be the dwelling place once again. Without the Et, without the Aleph Tav, there's no connection. There's no bridge. There's no Vav. There's nothing to join the two. They can walk step in step. They can touch but not touch. But until they have the Aleph Tav, until they have that Vav to connect it, now they're unified. We find that as a dead body, Israel, the dry bones, are unable to come into the presence without coming in contact with one who will sprinkle them with the waters of separation, cleansing them from death that's taken from the sacrifice of the red heifer. And when you begin to look at this, we understand that not only does Israel come out of Egypt, they're tainted by death from their idolatry in Egypt. When they are delivered, literally resurrected by crossing the Red Sea, you would think, okay, they've been cleansed from it, and yet they go right back. And they come in contact with death again because they build the golden calf. And idolatry is akin to coming in contact with a dead one. And so now we find Israel, the reason they're dry bones, the reason they have no life is because they have come in contact with a dead one. Just as Adam did in the garden when he came in contact with the Nakash. Now they themselves are tainted by death. And now you can begin to understand why all of this entire book of Leviticus is dedicated to what's taking place in the tabernacle. He's teaching them this is about the redemption plan. This is the protocol. This is what's going to take place in order for you to be restored. And we find that we read in Numbers chapter 19, verse 11, that if you've come in contact with something that was dead, you are unclean. One who has touched a dead body is unclean for 7 days. Well, isn't it quite interesting? This tabernacle has been set up and sitting there for 7 days. And we find the tabernacle represents this dead body of Israel, one that's come in contact with death. It's set apart for 7 days in an unclean condition. And it becomes a microscopic view of the entire redemption plan, because how many of you realize that a day is as 1,000 years and 1,000 years is as a day? The second coming of the Mashiach will be on that 7th day. Why is he coming back on the 7th day? To see if you're clean, to see if you're still contaminated with death, or if you're choosing to walk in life. That's why the dead bones have to come to life. Because when he returns, he's coming back for that living body. He's not coming back for a valley of dry bones. Because if the valley is still dead and has no life in it, then you're cut off. There's no connection. And so we find that this 8th day is the day where they will be given their answer in a new beginning. Will the Aleph Tav sprinkle them with the waters of separation, the waters that are mixed with the ashes of the red heifer, the Parah Adamah, which is a picture of the Messiah's sacrifice? Will the Aleph Tav sprinkle them, taking on their uncleanness so that they might now live and once again be restored? And that's what's amazing when you begin to study the sacrifice of the red heifer. The one that would administer the waters, they themselves become unclean. They take on the impurity so that the one that had been dead can be pure and cleansed. And so for the Olive Tav, the Mashiach, to answer them by them being allowed to come into contact with his presence, it was an indicator he would take on their death. He would take on their impurity. He would take on their uncleanness so that they could live again. And so we find that not only does the Messiah respond fully understanding what this means, that he will become the sacrifice. He will become the red heifer to cleanse the nation of Israel. But the people also understand, having been taught the tabernacle protocol, what will be required of the Olive Tav on their behalf. They understand what they're asking. And we find that this 8th day is when their answer will be given. Now, it's no accident that this particular Shabbat, coinciding this year with Shemini, is known as Shabbat Parah. It's the first Shabbat following Purim and leading up to Passover. There's 4 special Shabbats that lead up to the Feast of Passover. This is one of them, and it's known traditionally as Shabbat Parah. And in addition to the Torah portion of Shemini, the passage of the Parah Adumah, the red heifer, is read. So it's no accident this is taking place on the same Sabbath. Random tradition or divine connection, you decide, but Numbers chapter 19 is traditionally read on this Sabbath. They're reading about the red heifer sacrifice. They're reading about the rules concerning how they can once again enter into the presence. At the same time, Shemini, the answer is being given. Now, when the tabernacle was filled with the presence and the glory, it was representing a shuv, a return of the the Olive Tav, the Mashiach, connecting man back. It's a covenant promise to be offered up as the Parah Adamah on behalf of the one who is tainted by death. And yet we find that when his presence fills this tabernacle, the message is twofold. The promise is confirmed. He answers, yes, I will do this on behalf of the people. The glory resides in the physical tabernacle man, and we find that it's a promise that in the future, the bones would be able to be reunited and live again. But, as we said, it's twofold. The glory resides in the physical tabernacle man and not the people. The Torah protocol must still be fulfilled. They have been sprinkled by his answer. We find that this is the 3rd day, the 3,000th year since the fall of Adam. And when you read Numbers chapter 19, we read about the waters of the red heifer, and you must be sprinkled on the 3rd day by the waters of separation, as well as on the 7th day before you can be declared clean. If you are not sprinkled on the 3rd day, it doesn't matter what happens on the 7th day, you're unclean. And so we find that he answers them. He brings them to Sinai to sprinkle them with the living water. Why? Because he knows this generation is not going to experience it, but he's looking ahead. You must be sprinkled on the 3rd day so that on the 7th day I can receive and collect the bones and they can live again. Amen? And so we find they're sprinkled on the 3rd day. They're still unclean, though, till the 7th day, our day. All of this is laid out in Numbers chapter 19, and we find that this generation here that's experiencing what's taking place in Shemini, their only opportunity to experience life is by ensuring that they are directly connected to this physical tabernacle, that they move in step with him. Why? Because this is the presence in this moment. And as long as they are connected, then they as well can experience a taste of what that life will be. Now we fast forward and we find that that same example still applies to us. The only way that we experience life is by staying in step with the living tabernacle, the Mashiach, who became that living tabernacle and offered himself up as the Parah Adamah. And as long as you stay in step with him, we may be described as a valley of dry bones, and yet you're able to get a taste of that life, and you're anticipating and waiting because we understand on the timeline, we're headed towards the 7th day. These bones will live again and be fully restored back to what you were intended to be. Amen? Now, as we continue to look at this, the return, the Shuvah of Yahweh, and the reconnection that's taking place here, it seems as if it's for the purpose of man being made once again into his image, according to the connections that we see in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. Remember, Shuvah Yahweh, the numerical value, connected it to that Hebrew word et, the aleph tav. Elohim et ha'adam. Man created in the image, when the aleph tav connects Elohim and man. And so we find that when Yahweh chooses to shuvah, to return, O Yahweh, to be reconnected to man, Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 seems to give us the reason why he would make this connection again. And it's for man to once again be in his image. So we have to look at the term image. It's Strong's number 6754, Selim. It's translated as image or likeness, but it implies not the appearance, but the function. To be in his image is to function in the same character, mindset, and purpose as Elohim. In other words, to have access and to understand the mind of Yahweh and then act upon it and see it carried out. That's the reason for this connection, so that you could once again walk in the character, in the mindset, and in the purpose of Elohim and become literally his body, his living body on the earth, representing him. Amen? We find that this is exactly what Messiah offers and restores to the people. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 5, it says, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Messiah Yeshua." It's the neshama entering the people again. It's no accident that in John chapter 20, verse 22, what does the Messiah do after he's resurrected and visits his disciples? He breathes on them. It's life entering the dry bones. It's the one that fulfilled the promise, the one that became the sacrifice, yet was resurrected. Death has no hold on him. He now in turn comes to his disciples and he releases the neshama upon them so that they now, just like Adam, can live again. Now, as we continue to look at this, Selim has the same numerical value, 160, as the Hebrew word nafal. And it means to fall, to be cast down. It's also the same term, though, used to describe the deep sleep that fell, nafal, upon Adam and upon Abram. And we find that both times a covenant-cutting process is taking place, and it's indicating life is being resurrected from a state of death. We find that Adam symbolically dies, nafal, a deep sleep falls upon him. Why? So that Isha, the bride, can be taken from his side and live, and together the two can become one and produce life. Be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. Abram symbolically dies. He falls into a deep sleep. Why? Because a covenant's being cut, and yet we understand Abram can't do it. He's a man of the flesh, but because of his obedience, he's put into this deep sleep. A covenant is cut on his behalf. Why? So that the bride, the seed, the house of Abraham could live. The bride could be delivered from Egypt and live and have a covenant promise that has been made sure by the same one that's now filling the tabernacle, the aleph tav, the et. Amen? And we find that both of these instances point towards the ultimate sacrifice of the Messiah, who also would nafal, who would go into that deep sleep, who would allow his flesh to be cut off. Why? So that once again, the Isha, the bride, could be resurrected and joined with him to live again. And so as we look at this, it seems to be indicating Selim, to be in the image, is directly connected with this concept of a deep sleep that takes place, symbolic of death. It seems to be revealing that Israel must allow their fleshly, carnal man to die. It must be circumcised. Isn't it interesting? The 8th day is also the day of circumcision. If this body's going to live again, they must allow it to be circumcised. They must deal with the fleshly, carnal man that would attempt to cause them to not be able to be who they've called to be. We find that the fleshly, carnal man must be circumcised in order that they might live or be resurrected. And if they will do so, once again, they will be Beit Selim. They will be in his image. They'll be able to function in the same character, mindset, and purpose. Galatians chapter 5, verse 17 deals with this. It says, "For the flesh lusteth," literally warreth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary the one to the other, so that you cannot do the things that you would. He's revealing to them all the way here in Shemini that fleshly, carnal man has to be dealt with, or else you'll never be able to access, walk in, and have access to the mind of the Messiah, because that fleshly carnal mind will consistently war against it. So in order to live again, they must deal with the flesh. Now, as we look at this term, though, can also be used to describe this word nafal, which can mean to fall, to be cast down. It can also be used to describe members or parts of the body that fall away or become emaciated. It's related to the Chaldean word for abortion, miscarriage, and an untimely birth. Isn't it interesting that one of the biggest afflictions of this nation has to do with this very thing, with the nafal, with the aborting of life? Why? It's symbolic and it's a reflection of what's taking place in the spirit. These bones are aborting. They're miscarrying the promise. They're refusing to carry it, and they're literally wasting away because they're not willing to deal with the carnal nature. They're not willing to circumcise the heart. And so now we see it manifested in the physical. If they refuse to deal with their carnal, fleshly nature, there can be no resurrection or life in these bones. They'll continue to have death ruling within them. They'll continue to wither away and literally fall off. There's death instead of life. Why? Because they've chosen to miscarry or abort this promise that they're being entrusted with. Once again, we find it's the shadow picture, the dead bones of Joseph carried alongside the Ark of the Covenant with the living presence. It's a reminder of both the promise of resurrection as they go hand in hand throughout the wilderness, a promise that one day they'll be united, but a reminder to the generation that was in the wilderness because of their own choices to continue to walk after the flesh, they remain dead bones. Even though right here was the living presence able to resurrect and breathe life into them. We find Yahweh's answer to Israel's petition of the tabernacle in Leviticus chapter 9, verse 24. Because remember, as they build this tabernacle and they begin to offer these sacrifices, the question still remains, will he answer them? Will he actually dwell in this that they've built and presented? Especially seeing as he first requested to dwell in them. Second of all, because they built a golden calf and they know they've been tainted, they're unclean. They have no right to ask this of him. What will he respond? In Leviticus chapter 9, verse 24, it says, "And there came a fire out from before Yahweh and consumed upon the altar the burnt offering and the fat, which when all the people saw, they shouted and they fell on their faces." The Hebrew wording reveals that the fire came from panim, literally the face of Yahweh, or the mouth. It's the same picture that when he breathes into Adam from his mouth, he releases the neshama. He releases that spirit, that breath into this tabernacle man. And then we read that the people shout and they fell on their face. The word fell there is Strong's number 5307, nafal. To fall, to be cast down. Yet that same word that we just looked at that can also mean a miscarriage, an abortion, or an emaciated body part. So we find that when the fire upon the altar, when this takes place, it's simultaneously a promise from the olive top that the bones of Israel will live again. Because if this tabernacle can live, that's an indicator that eventually these bones as well will live again. Amen? It's a voicing of his acceptance that he will be cut off in their stead. He will become unclean so that they might be clean. He'll be cut off so they can be resurrected and return. Yet we find that it's also an indicator that this generation that's standing there had miscarried their own chance to become his Selim on the earth. The presence remains on the ark and is not united with the bones of the people. The fire goes to the altar and not the people. The glory resides in that tabernacle that was built and not among the bones of Israel. So at the same time, it is both encouraging. We won't be cut off. There will be a generation in the future that will be returned. But also, my goodness, they fall upon their face because we missed it. We should have been what that altar is right now. Now, it's quite interesting that the very next verse, as you see all this taking place, and now we understand, my goodness, what's the conversation that's taking place between the Mashiach and the nation of Israel as this tabernacle is being dedicated. The very next verse, Leviticus 9:24, is the answer that's given. The fire goes out and burns upon the altar, and the people fall upon their face. The very next verse is Leviticus chapter 10, verse 1, and it goes into recounting the sin of Nadab and Abihu. Their names lend insight into what's truly taking place. In the English, we read that they bring strange fire, and they attempt to go into the holy place and offer up incense. And there's so many different readings and teachings that you'll see based on what's taking place here, and some will say that they just didn't know any better, they got caught up in the moment, but that is not the case when you look in the Hebrew language. They were priests. They had been taught for 7 days exactly how to enter, how not to enter, what to do, what was expected of them. Also, now with the weight of everything that's hinging upon this moment, you can understand, don't mess up. Israel, you've already messed up. Israel, you've already done things the wrong way. In this moment, just do what he tells you to do. Just be obedient. Follow the protocol. And yet Nadab and Abihu refuse to do so and are cut off. But we need to look at their names because their names begin to reveal what's taking place. Nadab is Strong's number 5070. It's translated as spontaneous, liberal. It comes from the 2-letter root. It's spelled nun dalet bait in the Hebrew. The 2-letter root, the nun dalet, forms the Hebrew word ned, Strong's number 5067, and it means a heap or a pile. It's first seen referring to the waters of the Red Sea being piled or heaped as they are parted. Remember, Shemini had the same numerical value as Ararat, the mountain, the floodwaters, and it connects us to the crossing of the Red Sea taking place on that same day, Aviv the 17th. And so when you see this connection with the name Nadab, his name is literally inferring that those waters that were parted for Israel to cross out of bondage, that's what his name's referring to, the waters that are piled up. We also understand that water is euphemistic of seed. When Israel crosses the Red Sea, it was symbolic not only of them being born again, literally resurrected, but as well a circumcision was taking place. It's a cutting off of the dead seed of Egypt, or it should have been. Yet here, Nadab's very name seems to indicate, and remember, the bait is attached to this. The bait represents the house, the people, the bride. Nadab's very name seems to indicate that the house is still holding on to that seed that should have been cut off. They're still attempting to carry around that carnal, fleshly man, the very trappings of Egypt that had them in bondage. Instead of allowing all of that to be cut off and left, they're carrying it and they're keeping it and they're housing it, and this is what is entering into the holy place. Abihu. Abihu is Strong's number 30. It's translated as "He is my father." And so when we see this name connected with Nadab, the two names together seem to indicate that when they brazenly entered the holy place, they're attempting to father something. They're attempting to resurrect, to bring life to the fleshly man or seed that was supposed to be cut off when crossing the Red Sea, when they realize that they have still been denied access to the Selim, the mind of Yahweh. They attempt to intrude and in their flesh father and create something on their own to literally give life to this. Well, when I was looking at this morning, I was reminded in Hebrew mysticism, I guess you would say, they teach of a creature called a golem. The Hebrew word golem is actually seen in the book of Psalms, but it's quite interesting because it's a body formed of clay by a man and brought to life in the Hebrew mystical circles. Yet they understand that this body doesn't have a soul. It's a body that's been built, and they're trying to bring it to life, but it's not a creation of Yahweh. It has no soul. And according to the sages, this is part of the sin at the Tower of Babel with Nimrod. This is what was being taken place, and this is what they were involved in. Now when we see Nadab and Abihu attempting to come into the holy place and give life, literally create something and bring it to life, a body, it seems as if they're doing the exact same thing that was taking place at the Tower of Babel. In their fleshly nature, they're attempting to build something and bring it to life, even though Yahweh has said, no, that's to be cut off. Let it die, let it go. And so now we find that with startling clarity, we realize this is exactly where we are once again today. Dry bones that have been brought out of bondage, gathered to form a body, with the anticipation of being filled with the outpouring of His glory, His presence, His breath, and with that, the unlocking of access to the mind of the Creator that's not been seen since the Messiah walked the earth. And yet, Shemini reminds us that how we handle this season determines whether this tabernacle will live again. Will we answer the voice that cries in the wilderness, presenting ourselves as a prepared tabernacle, or, like Nadab and Abihu, will there be those that attempt to bring life to a fleshly, carnal, dead body that has no soul within it, and yet this is what they attempt to father and create instead of allowing their own flesh to be circumcised and brought to life, reunited? We find this is the pattern pointing towards the building of the third temple. It's a dead body, just like the tabernacle was, until life enters it, until the presence enters it. It's a dead body. But this body will never house the glory or the presence. It will have no life within it. They will have built it. They'll attempt to, Nadab and Abihu, they'll attempt to father it, to create it, to bring it to life, but it's a golem. It has no spirit. It has no neshama. It does not house the mind of the Creator. In the attempt to resurrect this work of the flesh, we find that many will be cut off, just like at the Tower of Babel. This coming Nimrod, the anti-Messiah, will attempt to do the same things he was already involved in way back at the beginning. And yet we find at the same time that they're creating this body and attempting to bring life into it from the fleshly, carnal nature, we find that at the same time, the bones are being gathered. They're becoming a living tabernacle. They have sinews and muscles and skin being placed upon them, and they're awaiting the breath. And there's a cry that begins to be offered up from the bones that have been gathered, and they begin to cry, Shuvah Yahweh, return to the many thousands of Israel. And we find that it's this body, the bones that have been gathered, that will receive the neshama. And they stand in contrast to the golem, the tabernacle, the temple that's been built that has no life and doesn't have the neshama, because it's finally resting, shuvah, where it was always intended to be, among the people. Now, as we continue to delve into this, we find that the same letters that form Shemini also lend us the name Manasseh. Manasseh was the eldest son of Joseph. Manasseh is translated as causing to forget. It's from the root to forget, to deprive. It's also quite interesting because Manasseh is the first individual of Israel to be born in Egypt. Joseph is not born in Egypt. He's born in the promised land and brought to Egypt. The rest of the house is brought to Egypt. The first one to be born in bondage. The first one to be completely never have experienced what it meant to be in the land of his inheritance was Manasseh. Israel, having come out of bondage, are likened unto Manasseh. They've forgotten. They've been deprived. They no longer understand what it means to live. And yet we find that this name also holds a double meaning, as Joseph understood the redemption plan of Yahweh that was in motion. When he names his son, both Ephraim and Manasseh have a dual meaning. And it's quite interesting because his other son, Ephraim, connects you to the Parah Adamah. It can mean a double ash heap, one that has no life, but it can also mean doubly fruitful. The one that has had the ashes of the Parah Adamah, the one that has been cleansed by the sacrifice of the Messiah, will be made doubly fruitful. Manasseh, the one that has been forgotten and deprived, will learn to live again. Amen? We find that as Joseph names these sons, he understands the redemption plan. And it's no accident that it's Joseph's bones that become the shadow picture of Israel. He understands that though his bones will be lifeless for a season, he knows the redemption plan, and he looks way ahead, all the way to the end, and he knows that his bones will live again. And so he names his sons Manasseh, Ephraim. Let's look a little closer at this name Manasseh that's directly connected to Shemini. It contains the root stem mashah, mem, shin, hey, and it means to draw or to pull. It's the same root as the name Moshe, the one from whom the living water is drawn, the one that was given access to the presence, the only one that was allowed to experience it and to truly understand what it meant to answer the voice that cried on the mountain. Mashah, this root to form Manasseh, it has inserted into it the letter Nun. The letter Nun represents seed, word, or life. The letter Nun, though, as well represents the ability for lineage to continue on, perpetuation. It literally represents the firstborn, a family line that continues. That's why it means life. It continues on. It goes on and on. And so we find that Manasseh literally begins to offer the promise to Israel that even though they've forgotten what it means to live, that they've been so far removed from it, that there's a firstborn. There's the firstborn of many brethren that will come and draw forth the living water to sprinkle those that have been unclean and restore them. What do these Hebrew word plays reveal? Israel, while in bondage, has been deprived. They've been cut off from the presence, the neshama, the mind, and the intellect of the Creator, yet the very promise of their resurrection is hidden within this name. If they will choose to draw forth the living water of His word, then their house, their lineage will continue on. It will be given and restored to life. And we find that the promise of Ephraim and Manasseh, it wasn't just for the generation that was standing at that physical tabernacle waiting to be restored. That was a promise that was all the way to the seventh day, to the ones that would be standing there. The bones of Joseph, He was declaring over them, His house, His seed. You will live again. You will once again be restored to life. You'll be taught and reminded what it means to walk in His presence. And we see this fulfilled. Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 10, he prophesies of it. He says, so I prophesied as He commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived, and they stood up on their feet, an exceeding great army. The bones of Joseph finally live again, no longer separate from the ark, walking step in step, but united as one. Od Yosef Kai. Joseph yet lives. Shabbat Shalom.